actually identified through very specific and detailed research just how important families are. For example, over 30 years ago, Martin White was the director of an early start program in the US that was aimed at promoting through professional childcare and nursery education the child's development, cognitively, educational, and so forth. But this was his conclusion at the end of millions of dollars having spent on these Head Start programs. We came to believe, he said, that the informal education which families provide makes more of an impact on a child's total educational development than does the formal educational system. Well, just to be sure, both are important. Yes, formal education system is something we need to grow and develop, flourish. But at the end of it all, the way in which children are educated by their families is also a very critical dimension. And the same is true of therapy. So, for example, Roberts and Kaiser, who reviewed a lot of language and speech intervention programs, came to this conclusion that parent-implemented interventions have a significant positive impact on the receptive and expressive language skills of children with and without intellectual disabilities. Now, admittedly, those intervention programs may well have been supported by therapists, such as speech and language therapists, for instance, but you didn't need the speech and language therapist to always be there to make sure that the impact was happening. So more speech and language therapy sessions wasn't the answer. It was getting the parents involved in doing the therapy that became so critical. And we're learning that lesson in areas like the complex, the care of children with complex healthcare needs, where they may need tube feeding, for example. Those children in the past may have stayed in hospital wards, not very good for their development. But we have learned that by discharging those children into home settings and supporting the children and their parents in order to provide the intensive care they need, it is feasible to do that within a homely setting. And those parent-implemented nursing programs have again shown their value in the child's overall development. So we come to this topic with a great deal of knowledge behind us. Recently, the Lancet, the leading British medical journal, commissioned a series of reviews about how children's development can be nurtured all over the world. What are the key things that are needed in order to optimize children's development? They called it nurturing care, and it was focused mainly at the 0 to 4-year-olds. But what they said, I think, is just as applicable throughout the whole of childhood. There were 3 fundamental areas that were important for the child's physical well-being: health, nutrition, security. Now, those are areas I'm not going to deal with particularly because there will be other podcasts, I'm sure, come along, might cover some of those areas. And to a large extent in Western affluent society, those 3 topics are pretty well covered. Not so much in the developing world, admittedly, but that was part of the rationale for Lancet commissioning these particular studies. But the 2 I do want to focus on were the area of responsive caregiving and its importance to children's development. And that includes what I've already mentioned, showing the child love, affection, and affirmation. Because one of the things that parents may be inclined to do is focus on what the children are not able to do, and therefore they don't get much praise. That is, the children don't get much praise. Whereas if you focus also on affirming what the child can do and giving them praise, that often is something that will help nurture their development. But there's 2 other things. The responsive interactions that family have with children. It boils down to being able to respond to what the child is doing or saying, instead of directing the child or asking the child lots of questions. And when you look at the interactions that parents have with children, there is a big bias towards wanting to direct the children to do what you want them to do or to behave how you want them to behave, rather than doing this responsiveness. But parents who have more responses to their children's actions or to what the children say, those children are seen to show more developmental progress compared to those directive parents. And the other thing I've also mentioned, how important the engagement in everyday routines is with children. And of course, in a world filled with alternatives such as televisions, DVDs, mobile phones in which they can watch children's television programs wherever they are, as screen time, that very often means that the child is babysat by the technology rather than being an active participant in many of the things that are happening in the household. Now, that's not to try totally screen time, but it is a reminder that just by engaging children in everyday routines, such as setting the table, emptying the waste baskets, or whatever around the house, is a very good way of getting the child much more engaged in everyday routines. The third area that the Lancet review emphasizes is the importance of early learning. And in this respect, they highlighted three aspects: the provision of books, toys, and playthings. Now, some homes may not have the resources to provide children with the books and toys that we might take for granted in an affluent Western society. But playthings can be saucepans. Playthings can be sticks and stones. And you only go to a country like Africa where maybe there's a scarcity of these sorts of things to realize that there's a lot of substitute playthings that can give the children lots of fun, and indeed people might say much more fun than some of the sophisticated toys that we now buy for our children. But the other thing that children need is opportunities to learn and to explore. And that means being prepared to take a bit of a risk, because things will get dirty. They will want to do things that maybe you don't want them to do in case they hurt themselves. But that opportunity to explore can be a very critical way of helping children's development. And the third feature is giving children the opportunity for quality preschool experiences. Preschool is the place where they not only socialize, but they also develop cognitively, and they start to learn to control their emotions and become less centered on themselves and having to appreciate other people as well.